The wind had been picking up for hours. At first it felt like nothing, just a normal breeze brushing across the surface of the lake. But as night fell, everything changed. The water turned restless. The waves grew taller, crashing violently against the wooden boat. Their once steady rhythm now beat like war drums in the dark. The men inside the boat weren't adventurers. They were ordinary people who had obeyed a clear instruction: cross to the other side. What seemed like a simple task had turned into a nightmare. Every pull of the oar felt heavier. The darkness around them was almost suffocating. There was no moonlight, no stars, no shoreline in sight, just the violent sea, an invisible sky, and silence from heaven. It hadn't started this way. Earlier that day they had been filled with purpose. They had listened, trusted, and moved forward. There were no signs of danger, no storm clouds, no voices of warning. Only peace and the clear command to go ahead. And so they went with confidence, but now, trapped in the middle of chaos, it felt like that peace had been a trick, a setup. The waves didn't care about obedience. The storm didn't pause for faith. The night didn't lighten just because they believed. Everything around them screamed, "You are alone." The wind was howling. The boat creaked, and fear began to speak louder than memory. One of the men leaned over the edge and stared into the abyss. "Is he watching?" he whispered. No one answered. Another wrapped his arms around his knees, silently praying for morning. But it was useless. The night was nowhere near over, and deep inside, each of them felt the same thing. They were in the middle of something far beyond their control. Some began to question. Had they made a mistake? Did they misunderstand the instruction? Why would God send them into a storm? It didn't make sense. If He loved them, why the silence? Why the distance? Why the fear? It was as if heaven had turned its face away, and that question echoed louder than the storm. Where is God now? If you've ever felt this way, you're not alone. If you followed the path you thought was right and ended up in a storm, you're in good company. Sometimes the greatest challenges come not from disobedience but from obedience. Sometimes the storm is not a punishment, but a setup for something greater. And maybe that's your story too. If this has ever happened to you, write in the comments. Your testimony might be someone else's lifeline tonight. Suddenly, another wave crashed, soaking them all. Their clothes were drenched, their hands blistered, their hearts pounded. No one spoke anymore. They were out of strength, out of hope, out of explanations. And just when it seemed like nothing could get worse, one of them looked out into the dark distance and froze. He rubbed his eyes, looked again. His voice trembled. "There's something out there." They turned toward the dark horizon. No one said a word. The wind kept howling, the waves kept roaring, and out in the chaos, a shadow began to move, closer. The figure was barely visible, but undeniable. It didn't move like the wind, it didn't sway like a tree in a storm. It moved with purpose, straight toward them. One of the men stood up, squinting into the darkness. His hands trembled as he pointed. "There. Do you see it?" Another stumbled to his feet, eyes wide. "What is that?" Panic spread like fire. Some thought it was a ghost. Others dropped to the floor of the boat, shielding their eyes. "It's coming closer!" someone shouted. Their hearts beat like thunder. In the middle of a sea that threatened to consume them, something impossible was walking straight through the storm. Not floating, not flying, walking on water. It didn't make sense. The sea was wild. The wind was vicious. Yet the figure came calmly, untouched by the chaos. Each step seemed to defy the laws of nature. The boat rocked violently, but the figure remained steady. They were no longer afraid of the storm. They were afraid of what was beyond it. Some of the men clung to each other, whispering prayers. Others stared in frozen silence. It was as if time had slowed down. Every heartbeat echoed. Every wave felt distant. All that mattered was the figure walking closer, and the realization that the storm might not be their biggest problem. If you're watching this and have ever felt like your problems multiplied the moment you tried to obey, this part is for you. Sometimes, when the storm hits, something divine is already on its way, walking toward you, and you don't even recognize it. That's how fear works. It distorts your vision. It blinds you to the miracle that's approaching. So if you're in the middle of your own storm, pause right now and consider, what if the thing you're most afraid of is actually your breakthrough? One of the men stood up again. "I'll ask him," he said, his voice trembling. He cupped his hands and shouted, "Who are you?" The storm howled in response. The figure took another step closer. Then a voice came, not loud but clear, cutting through the wind like a sword. "Do not be afraid, it is I." That voice shattered the fear. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a ghost. It was someone they knew, someone they had trusted, listened to, walked with, the one they had left everything to follow. He had come. Not before the storm, not after it, but right in the middle of it, on the water. In that moment, everything changed. Their fear turned to awe. Their panic turned to stillness. One of them, braver than the rest, stepped toward the edge of the boat. His eyes were locked on the figure. "If it's really you," he said, "tell me to come to you." And without hesitation, the figure responded, "Come." The others watched in disbelief as the man lifted one foot over the edge. The wind was still wild, the waves still high, but for one heartbeat, all that mattered was that voice. And he stepped out. The first step felt like nothing, like stepping onto solid ground. But it wasn't. Beneath his foot was water, wild and churning. Yet it held him. His eyes never left the one who called him. Behind him, the others gasped. He took another step and then another. Every movement defied reason. Each footfall was a small act of defiance against fear. The wind shrieked, the waves rose high on either side, but he walked right into the heart of the storm. His mind screamed that this was impossible, but his eyes clung to the impossible now standing before him. For a moment, faith was stronger than gravity. Trust silenced doubt, and water became a path. He kept walking, step by step, one breath at a time. His heart pounded, not from fear but from wonder. But then it happened. A gust of wind struck him harder than the rest. It was colder, louder, and it made him look away. Just for a second, just long enough for doubt to crawl in. He looked at the waves. He saw how deep the water was. He remembered what men aren't supposed to do, and the miracle began to fade. He started to sink, slowly at first, then faster. Water filled his robes, his hands flailed, panic returned. "Lord," he cried out, the storm swallowing his voice. "Save me!" It only took one word, one cry. And instantly, a hand reached down and pulled him back up. He wasn't left to drown. He wasn't punished. He was caught, saved, held. And maybe that's what you need to hear today. God doesn't let people drown when they cry for help, not when they're walking toward Him, not even when they lose sight for a moment. If you've ever doubted in the middle of your miracle, hit like. You're not alone. Doubt doesn't cancel the call. Fear doesn't erase the voice. You were chosen to walk where others sink, and He still holds out His hand. They stood there for a moment, on the water. The storm still raged around them, but in that space between fear and faith, there was peace. The man who had stepped out of the boat stared into the eyes of the one who had caught him. "Why did you doubt?" the voice asked, not in anger, but with the tenderness of someone who knows the limits of the human heart. There was no shame, no judgment, only love. A love stronger than water. A love that walks through storms just to be close. A love that reaches down when we're sinking, not to condemn, but to lift. Together, they walked back toward the boat. No one spoke. The storm was still roaring, but somehow it felt distant now. As their feet touched the wooden boards again, something happened. Without warning, the wind stopped. The sea flattened. The silence returned. Not the heavy silence of fear, but the stillness of peace. And all the men in the boat fell to their knees. Not out of fear this time, but worship. They had seen power, yes, but more than that, they had seen love. They had seen the one who commands storms and still chooses to walk into them, for them. The sea was now glass, and the boat floated gently, as if the storm had never existed. But the men inside would never forget it. Their faces were wet, not from the sea but from tears. No one dared speak. They had just witnessed something that shattered every limitation they had placed on what was possible. It wasn't just that he walked on water. It wasn't just that he calmed the storm. It was when he did it, right in the middle of their fear, right when they had run out of strength, right when they believed they were alone. And that changed everything. He didn't wait until they had it all together. He didn't show up only after they had rowed hard enough or believed strong enough. He came when they were broken, doubting, and near collapse. That was the moment he stepped in. That was when his presence became visible. And they realized he had seen them the whole time, from the shore, from the mountain, from a distance. He had never lost sight of them, even when they had lost sight of him. The storm didn't block his vision. Their cries didn't go unheard. He was watching, waiting for the right moment to walk through the waves. This story may feel ancient, but it is happening again right now, in your life, in mine. Maybe you're in a storm of your own. Maybe you've been rowing for hours, feeling like God is nowhere to be found. But what if He's already walking toward you? What if the thing you fear most will become the scene of your greatest encounter with Him? Friend, if this resonates with your heart today, don't keep it to yourself. Share this message. Someone else may be in the same storm, waiting for hope to appear. As the boat drifted, still and quiet, they remained on their knees. The man who had walked on the water was silent now, but his presence filled every corner of that vessel. They didn't need explanations. They didn't need to understand the wind or the waves. All they knew was that God had been near, closer than they thought, stronger than they imagined, and more loving than they had ever known. And suddenly, the destination didn't seem so urgent anymore. The lesson wasn't about reaching the shore. It was about what they had learned in the middle of the sea. So now it's your turn. You may not be in a boat on a lake, but you might be standing in the middle of a situation that feels just as uncertain, just as impossible. You may not see the answer yet. You may not even recognize the footsteps approaching, but don't give up. Don't stop watching the horizon, because He's still the one who walks through storms. He's still the one who reaches out when you sink. And He still whispers, "Do not be afraid. It is I." If this story has touched you, take a moment to subscribe, share it with someone, and check out the message waiting for you in the next video. It might be exactly what you've been praying for.